Hey guys, it's Jack and welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Bible study. Today we are going to dive into Mark chapter 3, so grab your Bibles, let's get started. If you missed any of my past Bible study videos, I will leave them linked in the cards and the description box for you guys. And if you want to know what Bible I'm using, this is the Jesus Bible NIV version, and I will also leave a link to this in the description box. So let's not waste any time and let's just dive on into Mark chapter 3. In my last Bible study video, when we went over Mark chapter 2, we went over a lot of things. Jesus eats with the sinners, Jesus is Lord of Sabbath. So we started talking about Sabbath and kind of diving into that, and I'm really excited because in chapter 3 we're going to be talking more about Sabbath. So we'll dive into that, starting with Jesus heals on the Sabbath. We'll also read about the crowds follow Jesus, Jesus appoints the 12, and then Jesus accused by his family and by the teachers of the law. So those are the sections that we're going to dive into. So without further ado, let's not waste any more time and let's just dive on into today's Bible study. So Mark chapter 3 verse 1. Another time Jesus went into the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. So stopping right there in verse 2. So some of them, that's referring to the Pharisees, who you know were the teachers of the law, the religious teachers of the law, and they just had it out for Jesus. And so it says they were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. So the reason that's a big deal is, like we've talked about with Sabbath, Sabbath was a day of rest, and that means no work at all. Even like picking grains from the field to eat, that's considered work. Cannot do that on the Sabbath. So they're like, let's watch him. Let's see if he's gonna heal this man on the Sabbath. And what's funny just about that sentence alone, so like in the Pharisees' mind, they already know like you don't do any work on the Sabbath. That is a day that we observe for resting only. That is all we do. And so that they already know that. But I think because they've just been watching Jesus for some time now, they just know his character. And even though they don't know Jesus's heart because they're so stubborn and they're stuck in their ways, they kind of do know Jesus's heart at the same time, because here you have this man with a shriveled hand and they're like, we know, like, let's keep an eye on Jesus and see if he heals. Like, it doesn't say it in here, but it's like you can assume that they were thinking, you know what, Jesus like does that kind of thing, like he just heals people. They just know that about Jesus, that he cares and loves people and heals them. And whether they could ever admit that or not, that's like subconsciously, like if you're paying attention, it's because you know Jesus is that good and that's something that he would do. So I just think it's funny that they already were like, okay, let's see what he does with this man with the shriveled hand. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, or to save life or to kill? I think this is such a, like, it's not a funny question because Jesus wasn't trying to be funny here, but to me, I just think it's funny, this question, because like it's a very rhetorical question. Like, you don't need to answer, like, which is lawful to do on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil? Obviously to do good, or to save a life or to kill? Obviously to save a life. But he asked this in the synagogue in front of everyone and the religious teachers and leaders, and then it says, but they remained silent. Of course, because it is a rhetorical question. And the Pharisees knew, obviously, you do good, you save a life, don't kill, don't do evil, you know what I mean? But in that question, I wrote a note here at the bottom if you want to know what my notes say, but I wrote that the truth about Sabbath is that there is never a wrong day to do good. And that's what Jesus is saying here in that rhetorical question. Like, there is no wrong day. Sabbath or no Sabbath, you're supposed to do good. Like, that's just it. There doesn't need to be laws around that. You just do good, whether it's Sabbath or not. Even if it is Sabbath, you don't do bad. Like, you don't do evil, you don't do bad. Like, I don't know, it's just so funny to me, but like, that just goes to show how stubborn and stuck in their ways the Pharisees were, these teachers of the law. They had all the information right in front of them, but they were just so blinded. It's actually really sad when you think about it. But moving on to verse 5, he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. So this is Jesus, he's looking around. Yeah, He's angry, he's deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Because even though he made this statement, they still, like, nothing is gonna sway or change their minds. And that's just like so disappointing. So he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out and his hand was completely restored. So Jesus heals the man with the shriveled hand. Verse 6, then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Like, how evil is that though? Like, Jesus makes that statement, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill. Jesus makes that statement, you know it's a rhetorical question, and you see Jesus do this compassionate and mighty thing by healing this man with the shriveled hand, and they're like, no, we're gonna kill him. Like, let's go plot to kill him. Like, let's find out how we can get rid of Jesus. Like, how evil do you have to be to like think that you see someone get healed and that makes you so upset that you want to go and kill the healer? The Pharisees were just something else, man. They were just something else. The next section we're gonna read about is called Crowds Follow Jesus. So verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan around Tyre and Sidon. Verse 9, because of the crowd, he told the disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. Verse 10, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. I mean, you can imagine like the people, just kind of like this news spreading around of Jesus healing the sick and healing people with the diseases and leprosy and all this sort of thing. He's healing people left and right. And so if you're suffering any sort of like disease, sickness, you're gonna wanna go and pursue Jesus, right? For he had healed many, so that those with the diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Verse 11, whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Okay, so those two verses. First, verse 11, whenever an impure spirit saw Jesus, it fell to the ground and cried out, "You are the Son of God." This is something I've shared many times in my Bible studies, but how crazy is that even impure spirits know Jesus. They know his name, they know who he is, yet us mere humans have such a hard time grasping this idea of Jesus. But demons and impure spirits know his name and they fear him. They are so scared of him. They bow down and cry because they're so scared of him. Kind of reminds me, I don't know if we read about it yet. I know we did in Matthew, but we might not have gotten to that point yet here in Mark. But when Jesus heals that man that had an impure spirit and drives the spirit into the pigs, and then the pigs go and drown. That moment in itself too, like, it's just more examples of how these impure spirits, these demons, they fear Jesus because they know who he is, they know his power, they know he is the Son of God. Okay, that was verse 11. Now in verse 12, it says, but he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. So whenever Jesus would heal someone and remove the impure spirits, he would tell that person, don't go around and tell everyone. Jesus's mission on earth and his ministry actually wasn't to go and heal every single person on earth. So that's why, like, he didn't necessarily need or want this huge crowd of people just wanting to be healed, and then nothing happens after that. Like, they don't follow Jesus, they don't, you know, they just want to be healed and then go about their merry way. So Jesus didn't need every single diseased person to chase after him and to be healed. So that's why those he did heal, he gave them strict orders not to tell anyone. But I don't think really anyone kept that promise or that word, because there were crowds following Jesus left and right. Now the next section we read is a small one, but Jesus appoints the 12. So these are the 12 disciples. Verse 13, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. So Jesus picks these 12 men so that they might be with him, that they might go out and preach and drive out demons. So Jesus wants to give authority to these 12 men. Verse 16, these are the 12 he appointed. And I wrote it down here just so I have like this nice big easy to read list that I can always turn back to if I want to remember who like the disciples are. These are the 12 he appointed. Simon, who he gave the name Peter, so Simon Peter. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them, together because those were brothers, James and John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means son of thunder. Sons of thunder. That's such a weird nickname, and I feel like this it's like the only time I've read that nickname. Let's just remember that. He called them sons of thunder. Okay, verse 18, finishing off the list of the disciples here. We have Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus. So we had 2 James there. Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him, which we know that Judas Iscariot is the one that betrays Jesus. And after that whole event, he is later replaced with Matthias. So I have that written here. The last section we're going to read about today is Jesus accused by his family and by teachers of the law. So starting in verse 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so he and his disciples were not even able to eat. I kind of just picture them being like squished and like there's no room because it's just overcrowded, so there's no possible way for them to just sit and eat because it's just so crowded in this house. Verse 21, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. So these are likely the people that he grew up with, like before he even started his ministry. This is just like, hey, that's just regular old Jesus. What is he doing? And then verse 22, it says, and the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, he is possessed by Beelzebul, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons. Of course, you know, Jesus had to have a clever and solid comeback to that. Verse 23, so Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. Parables was a way that Jesus loved to teach and speak a message so that people would understand. And you can think of parables as parables are earthly examples with heavenly meaning. That's like my favorite way that parables has ever been described. It's an earthly example with a heavenly meaning, and I love that so much. So that's how Jesus always spoke. But he says, how can Satan drive out Satan? And it's true. Verse 24, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand, which is also true. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand, also true. And if Satan opposed himself, basically if what they're saying is true, which is not, if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house. Truly I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter. But whoever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin. So here Jesus says this is the one sin that will not be forgiven. Those who blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, which is what the Pharisees are doing right now. Verse 30, he said this because they were saying he has an impure spirit. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mothers and brothers are outside looking for you. Verse 33, who are my mothers and brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in the circle around him and said, here are my mothers and brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. So this portion right here could be kind of confusing to read, right? You'd be like, why is he saying that to his own mother and brothers? But the thing is, okay, there's a couple things that we're gonna dive into. So number one, the title, Jesus accused by his family. They said earlier, he is out of his mind. And we also read John chapter 7, verse 5. It straight up says, Jesus' brothers did not believe him, did not agree with him or his ministry. In the nicest way, they were against him. If they don't believe him, they don't agree with him, then what's the opposite of that? They were against him. So Jesus' family wasn't always on his side. They didn't always have his back. But also when reading this, it may be like surprising to read because you kind of just assume like Jesus's mother and brothers would have like special treatment. So like, oh, like, yeah, let them in. But Jesus says here, whoever does God's will is my brothers and sisters and mothers. So he's not looking at the flesh, the worldly, fleshy brother, sister, mother. He's looking at it from an eternal point of view, a heavenly point of view. And this right here, this last verse, that's an invitation to be part of Jesus's family, which is the coolest thing ever. Like, Jesus is saying, if you do God's will, you are my brother, my sister, my mother. We are family. And I think that's so exciting, like, that Jesus just even extends that invitation to others. So he looks beyond what is worldly and what is, you know, in the flesh. He's looking through a heavenly perspective, heavenly goggles, if you will. And also, just another thing to think about is, like, Jesus. Like, first, let's just think, Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, his own family didn't always support him. And that's like, think about that in our own lives. Like, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to maybe your family or, you know, the people close to you. Maybe they don't always have your back. They don't always like support you in the things that you do. That can be so crushing, right? And I think what is a little bit comforting is just knowing that Jesus went through the same thing. You hear all the time people say, God knows what you're going through. He knows the feelings that you're feeling. And it's because he experienced every feeling that you could possibly experience. So this sort of like, and it doesn't say that Jesus was like heartbroken over this, but like that kind of like that disappointment of not having your family's support, that's crushing, right? Jesus experienced that. His own family, his own brothers. John chapter 7 verse 5 literally says, actually I'm just gonna go over to it real quick. John chapter 7 verse 5 literally says, for even his own brothers did not believe him. Even his own brothers, and that's Jesus. So I hope if anyone watching is kind of experienced that same thing where you are rejected by your own, just be encouraged and comforted today knowing that Jesus knows exactly what you are going through and exactly how that feels. And I think there's just comfort in knowing that you're not alone. So when people do say that God knows exactly what you're feeling, he really does, because he experienced it here in the flesh as Jesus. So I hope that encourages you, and that wraps it up for this Bible study. So those were the sections that we read, and I'd love to know what stood out to you the most. I think for me, it kind of goes back from like talking about the Sabbath and then this last part that we just read, but when Jesus said, what is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? What like a funny question. Again, Jesus wasn't being funny here, but to me it's just like so funny, because there is no perfect day to do good. Do good every day, Sabbath or no Sabbath, do good every day. And then this last part, just reading about, you know, Jesus's own family not being behind him, not having his back, saying he's out of his mind. I just find so much comfort in that, because I can 100% relate to that. And to me, I just find so much comfort in knowing that Jesus knows how I feel. Jesus knows how I feel. And then just the fact that there's this invitation to be a part of Jesus's family by doing the will of God. That's very exciting to me, and I love reading that. So I would love to hear what like your biggest takeaway from today's reading was and what stuck out to you. Leave your comments below. I would love to read them, and I just want to say thank you so much for hanging out and joining me for today's Bible study. And again, if you want to check out any of my past Bible studies, I'll have a link to the playlist in the description box for you guys, as well as the cards. I hope you guys have an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye!